Hello.
Welcome to Salem, the podcast.
We are your hosts and favorite Salem tour guides.
My name is Sarah Black.
And I'm Jeffrey Lilley. Thanks for joining us.
Today, we're going to be talking about the Salem Witch Trials. Dun, dun, dun.
Cue the ominous music.
Right? Yeah.
And it is. It's ominous. It's sad. It's depressing. It's a little dark.
Yeah.
It's a lot dark.
It's a lot dark. It's kind of the darkest, I would say the darkest part about Salem's history.
Yeah.
And kind of what put us on the map.
So many people come here. They're like, ooh, Salem bucket list tours.
Halloween.
Yeah.
Nah. I had a guy on tour this past year, about 3/4 of the way through. He comes up to me and he's like, wow, this is kind of a downer. Yeah. I was taken aback. I kind of looked at him puzzled. Like, what did you think this was going to be about?
Well, they thought they would come here and a little hocus pocus.
Yeah.
A little bewitched. And
not so much death.
No. And I think they know. I think most people, we went to high school with Crucible. Mm-hmm. They know we killed people and said they were executed. And that stuck with us for better or worse. I think it's a complicated relation. Most relationships that we have with history are complicated.
I couldn't agree more.
But I think the Salem Witchcraft Trials are unique in a significant amount of ways. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, I think, is our sort of modern interpretation of what we call the Witch City. Salem has taken that for better or worse. If you're in the city, just look around.
Yeah, our taxis are green.
They got witches on them.
I pulled out on Essex Street last week and I saw a utility van, and on the side of it there was a big witch.
Yeah.
And it said Witch City Heating and Cooling.
So just a private company.
I kind of just chuckled to myself, like, it's pretty common.
If you see any of our police walking around or driving around, their badge is a witch on a broomstick in front of a crescent moon.
Our water tower has a witch on it.
Our high school team,
The witches.
like when I tell people, they're like, "Are you kidding?" Like, no joke. We're the Witch City. We have doubled down on that. But is that good? Is that bad?
Definitely a point of contention.
Yeah.
And we will end up digging into this whole idea of commercialization versus education on the witch trials towards the end of the episode. But first, we kind of wanted to give you a general overview of the trials themselves.
What happened here in 1692.
But understand that what we're about to offer, we're just scratching the surface. We'll give you more resources if you want to dig further in later on. But we're going to give you just kind of like an outline.
And before we do that, out of the gate, let's clear up one misconception, sort of pull back the curtain. By the way, when it comes to Salem Witchcraft Trials,
there were no witches.
Not a one.
We may be the Witch City, but...
there are witches here today.
Yes,
there
many.
Are people who practice a concept of Wiccan or paganism, their rites, their rituals, these sorts of things, whether that's from the witch's ball to the vampire witches to whatever the case may be.
First witch shop in America.
Yeah, but in 1692, no witches.
None.
Everyone who was accused, put on trial, executed, died in jail, all innocent.
And you have to remember, at the end of the day, these are all people living their lives.
Yeah, it's frontier territory. They're struggling to begin with.
Mm-hmm. So the trials themselves, I mean, this is nothing new. We had tens of thousands of people executed over in Europe for witchcraft, and we even had some here in the colonies. Definitely nowhere near that number, but dozens leading up to 1692. But Salem stands out because of the amount of people that were accused and the short amount of time it took place within. So when it's all said and done, you're looking at about 200 people accused. About 150 of them will end up in jail. 19 people are hanged. A man is pressed to death. And at least 5 die in prison. And this all takes place over just 13 months, beginning to end. Of those 19 executed, 14 were women, 5 were men.
Men can be witches too.
Yep, men can be witches too. The accused, their ages range all the way down from 4 years old up into their 80s. And these accusations, they don't just take place here in Salem, stretches anywhere from Boston to up north into what is today Maine. So it's a very large area that we're working with here.
So while we call them the Salem Witchcraft Trials, little bit of a misnomer. They should probably be called the Essex County Witchcraft Trials.
Yeah.
That's where we're located. So it's Essex County. And one of the reasons we call them the Salem Witchcraft Trials is because the trials were held in Salem. So the accused came from all over. And we're going to get into a lot of those specifics. The guy pressed to death, Giles Corey, promise we'll talk about that. The people dying in jail, we'll talk about that. The people accused up in Maine, Reverend Burroughs, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, keep in mind, this is just, we're scratching the surface
so
here.
We've got a lot to cover. But let's break down the geography like a little bit more. A lot of you come to Salem and you're like, cool, this bar I ate or drank at, this restaurant I went to. When you're walking down Essex Street, Washington Street, when you're on the Common, there's a small little area. It's pretty walkable. And in 1692, it looked a little different. Obviously, there was none of the brick.
So much brick now.
So much brick. But back then, Salem, as it stands today, was Salem Town. The adjacent town of Danvers was Salem Village, and Peabody was Salem Farms. If you have trouble sort of remembering the difference here, a town is bigger than a village.
Right.
Salem, the city, so Salem Town had about 2,000 people. Salem Village had about 500 people. So when Sarah says 200 or more people, that's a significant portion of the population. And we also need to understand that this all starts in Salem Village. It doesn't even start in Salem Town. And that's also important to the narrative. Mm-hmm. The first instances of an attack by a witch happen in Salem Village. That sort of helps us understand sort of who was living here, where they were, sort of how that geography also plays into the context.
Yeah, and how rural this area was.
Yeah. Salem, again, remember, these colonists have been here for, 1620 they get here, 1626 they found Salem. It's only about 66 years old. That's within some people's lifetimes. Some of the people who were executed in Salem were older than Salem.
Yeah, it's a baby city at this point.
Absolutely.
We're also right on the frontier.
Yeah.
Like the woods are just about a mile out. And inside those woods, you've got pure darkness, terrible threats of all types, a lot of fear these people were living in.
Yeah. Salem stands unique, as you mentioned, because of sort of these numbers and these things. But one of, in my opinion, the main contributing factor is that the Puritans believe this is the center of their theocracy in the New World. So they're coming here seeking that religious freedom. I mean, they were religious extremists, but they believed this was their chosen land. They were God's chosen people. This was their city on a hill. And Salem, named after Jerusalem, Salem means peace, as Jerusalem means the city of peace.
So for there to be a witch in Salem, well, that would make complete sense because this is where the devil would target.
Right? If this is God's chosen city, that's the devil's going to come knocking at your door. It's not Boston. It's not Ipswich. It's not Gloucester. The devil's like, I'm going after the capital, like right here, the heart of your religion.
These Puritans are living in a world where religion and law and science all is intertwined.
They believe in demons and magics and familiars in the invisible world, and another tool that the devil has in his toolbox, which are witches.
These people genuinely believed in witchcraft, believed in the devil.
Yeah.
This is not some,
hocus pocus?
No, it's not hocus pocus.
Not a bunch of hocus pocus?
This is embedded in their belief system.
Yeah.
This is something that they've grown up with. It's part of their, you could even say daily ritual. If something bad happens in their life, blaming it on a witch or the devil is not new. It's very common, in fact.
And almost, they're monotheistic in their beliefs, but they are almost pagan in their concept of the world. What I mean by that is, if there's a bad storm, a flood, a death in the family, millennia before, you would have ascribed this to the will of the gods. And the Puritans are like, oh, if it's a negative thing, they ascribe it to an attack by the devil or the influence of the devil. If it's a positive thing, if it's a child who's born healthy, if it's just the amount of rain you need for your crops, you're like, oh, the God has blessed us. And like looking back at these, you're like, okay, guys, like
just humans trying to find the answers.
Also, when we say witch, we should also understand that if I say, oh, think of a witch, many people are going to
Think of Bette Midler from Hocus Pocus.
And I think it's generational. Their first narrative of their pop culture relationship with a witch.
Right.
Whether that's
Samantha
from Bewitched, the Wicked Witch of the West.
Yep.
In Wizard of Oz. Wow.
Harry Potter.
So people of our generation probably think about playing Quidditch, Harry, Voldemort, whatever the case may be. You think of that Dark Lord.
And we're also living in a time where being a real witch is quite normal, especially if you live here.
Yeah.
But this is not what... Not at all.
Wipe all of those things from your cultural narrative. There's no Quidditch. There's no Hogwarts. There's no, ooh, my pretty. No pointy. Well, okay, pointy hats kind of comes in the narrative.
Broomsticks, yeah.
Yeah, but when we say witch, we mean an agent of the devil.
And it's not like you just... Well, I was going to say, it's not like you just sign up, but you kind of do.
You do. You just sign up.
So whether and the Puritans believe this, whether the devil came to you or you summoned him, you enter a formal, pretty much a legal pact in which you sign your name in his book. So books, literature, very important to Puritans during this time. You think of the religious scripture. Well, the devil had his version as well.
Yeah. We do the same thing today, right? You sign a contract.
Right.
Whether that's, 30-year mortgage, student loans, a marriage, you're putting your name, signing your name.
But in this context, you're signing your soul away to the devil, and in exchange, he gives you supernatural powers, wealth, immortality, pretty much anything that you want.
Sign me up.
I was gonna say, right? It doesn't sound horrible.
You're like, wait a minute. Sign on the dotted line, and I win the lottery and live forever.
Be kind of hard not to.
I mean, that's tempting, but then again, temptation. Right. And lead us not into, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so when we think about, again, witches, it is someone who has betrayed God. They've betrayed their baptism. They have betrayed their friends, their family, their community. They've turned, and think of who these people are. These people are sometimes your family members, your neighbors you like or don't like, but still someone you see on a daily basis.
Yeah, this is a small town, remember.
2,000 people. Yep. You have sat next to them in church.
This is going to lead to a ton of suspicion.
Yeah.
This is going to up the finger pointing.
One of these people is a witch, and that's just going to breed and foster this hate and this fear. And I can see where it comes from.
Well, I mean, it doesn't take long to look through the history books and find some other instance of individuals being targeted. Keep in mind that a lot of the accused, especially the first ones, were outcasts, people that kind of found themselves on the fringes of society.
That easy target.
The other.
Yeah.
Because, easy target. They were guaranteed to go down without, anyone really listening to them.
Demonization of an imagined other.
Yep.
So that's what the witch was. So again, when we talk about this, when we say these attacks, don't, again, try to dispel that pop culture narrative, because it's important to understand their religious beliefs. So that also brings us to what we know and don't know. Because all of that, obviously, we know. We have historical records. We know what their belief systems were, these things. But the actual accounts of what happened here in Salem, we don't have.
They are fractured.
Magically disappeared?
If only. Maybe we could magically get them back in that case.
I don't think throwing them into the fire counts as magically disappearing.
No, yeah. So we're dealing with a splintered picture. We've got pieces, but not all the information.
Right? It's like you're making a puzzle and you don't have the cover or all the pieces. So you're sitting here trying to you're like, I don't even know what I'm looking at half the time.
Thankfully, the Puritans were very good record keepers, and we do have a lot of documents.
We have some interrogations. We have personal journals.
We have some written accounts post-trials.
Yep. Warrants. We have warrants. But what went on in the actual court proceedings?
Do not exist.
Gone.
For as good as they were as record keepers, they also understood what that would look like a year from now, decade from now, century from now.
They were covering their tales.
To the point where a gag order is issued by the governor, and it is outlawed to even speak about these trials.
That's like the next year. That's not like decades down the line. That's like the next day. They're like, okay, cool, wash our hands of this. And he's like, how about we just put a law in place that says no one's allowed to print any material?
Not just print, I believe talking about it was also included in that. So if you dig through some of these principal characters, their personal papers, like Reverend Paris, we'll talk about him in a moment here. His sermons from that summer are
also gone. Yeah.
So diaries, letters, people did what they could
to sort of sweep it under the rug.
Yep. And they did a good job of it too.
Which leads us in this uncomfortable is the wrong word. Difficult.
Yeah, we can't give you an absolute, I'm going to use air quotes here, truth.
Yeah.
And as like historians, you learn what is truth because everything is filtered through a perspective.
Sometimes I'll definitely say I think or I believe, and that's my interpretation of some of the historical data, and from experts and whatnot. Be like that theory to me seems more plausible than this other theory. But some people are even like, well, I think this theory is more plausible. I'm like, I can't say no. They have equal weight, and you just ascribe to maybe one or the other.
So speaking of theories, before we do a little overview of what occurred, you want to talk about some of the reasons as to why?
So we might not know what happened, but we can definitely pick out some things that happened that led up to that. What do you think's the leading cause? If you had to be like the one...
No, don't. I'm going to stop you right there. I hate that. I hate that.
Okay.
I hate when people ask me like, what did this? And I wish there was one easy answer.
So I like an answer. I think I have.
Okay. I'll ask you for your answer in a second. I think humans are incredibly complex, and there was so much leading up to this incident that you can't discount anything. And I am very much on the side of a nuanced interpretation of what happened. It's not just one thing, but a multitude of factors. Historians have been trying to answer that question for literally centuries at this point. And it's not just historians, but starting in the 20th century, you'll see even psychologists, sociologists, medical doctors putting forth theories on this same subject. Everyone's trying to play detective, right?
Right.
Everyone's trying to provide something. And one in particular, and we should just knock this out right away because I get questions probably on every single tour about this. Ergot poisoning.
No.
The fungus on the rye.
No.
Was it drugs? No, it wasn't. But like I've even gotten shrooms in the water. They were on shrooms. No, I'm sorry. It would be so much easier to say that like this was, to blame this on mental illness or something in the bread. But unfortunately, or fortunately, that theory was discredited almost immediately. So I like to say that it is a perfect storm of a bunch of different things, and we are going to talk about those things throughout, but I have not one single answer. But I would love to hear yours.
Conflict with the indigenous people.
It's a good one.
And you're like, so again, we are colonizing their land.
Right.
We have just come off two massive conflicts with the indigenous people, which leave thousands of people dead. Farmsteads, homes, cities. So where I'm from in Groton, Massachusetts, there's a sign in the middle of the city that says Groton was razed to the ground. And I used to walk by this on my way to work at Dunkin' Donuts in high school every day. And it would say, and I just read it, and I never really knew what it meant. Groton was razed to the ground, and I'm probably going to get the dates wrong, so forgive me. I think it's like 1674, 1676, and then again like 1689.
King Philip's War?
Yeah. So King Philip's War decimated Groton, killed the majority of the population. At the indigenous people killed everyone there. Because obviously we're killing them and taking their land.
Right.
So anyone who survives is now a war refugee. You are coming back to these coastal cities, with nothing left. Your farm is gone, half your family is gone. Then you have to move in with your second cousin, and just you're adding to the burden of his household. There is more people, less food, less farms.
And you're bringing with you that trauma.
A significant amount of trauma. And then this happens again in the late 1680s as well. Another conflict with the indigenous people slightly farther north. And again, more people coming back to these Boston-centric Salem, Gloucester cities as refugees. And it is that instill genuine fear of the indigenous people, that genuine belief in God, in the devil, that unimaginable sense of trauma that takes over this community. And that is that driving sense of fear. And it is from there that, in my opinion, all these other things start to blossom.
Mary Beth Norton would be proud. If you're interested in this, check out In the Devil's Snare by Mary Beth Norton. I believe that when that came out, it was monumental. Like that was a theory that no one really had put forward up until that point. This whole idea that their conflict with the indigenous would result in this,
I can't
explosion.
Imagine. I watched my family get slaughtered by these indigenous people who I ascribe to be tools of the devil.
Yeah.
And I come back and all I hear is this religious extremism belief of the devil has come to destroy you and that there may also be witches amongst you. You're like,
yeah, y'all have to remember that these folks believed that those indigenous were in league with the devil, like literal agents of the devil. And if you look through some of the questionings that we do have, you'll find mentions of folks describing a native, basically.
And so when we look at that picture and then you add into it like political instability,
social infighting between families, between towns,
it's just emotional depression, anxiety,
droughts and harsh winters,
horrible winters. Like if you're from New England or the North Dakotas, Michigan, you know what a bad winter is. And then couple that with a significant lack of food and firewood, living in a frontier territory with that fear of death by the indigenous people or just illness. And they were scared. And fear breeds these sorts of behaviors in people. I wouldn't say that there is a single straw that breaks the camel's back, but there's a whole lot of straws.
A lot of straws piling up in lead up to that year. So should we dig into what exactly happened?
Like we said,
we're going to do a brief overview. We could spend hours and hours going over the day-to-day, which we are. Not today. This is like a basic reference episode for you to just come back and if you want just like a general.
So when we start talking about things in the future, you've already gotten a little bit of a groundwork.
Yep. Build up a good foundation.
Which you have to do in any historical context.
Indeed. So
the year is 1692.
In 1692. You don't do that on your tour, do you?
No, I
don't either. I passed someone singing to his tour group, and I looked back at my group, and I was like, I'm not going to do that for you. Don't ask. I'm not going to do a fun voice either.
I'm sure you have a lovely singing voice.
No. I'm sure I do too, but I'm not going to be singing in my group.
That's fair.
Nor am I going to be doing these cheesy voices. So the year is 1692. It's at the beginning. We're in January, and we're not in Salem town. We're starting, like we said, in Salem village. So this is what is today Danvers. It's going to start in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris.
And again, that's also important because this is the Puritan, this is God's country, and then it is God's city. And it is now in
the Reverend's house.
Yeah.
So he's been working for Salem Village. He's living with his daughter, Betty Parris, who's 8 years old, and his niece, Abigail Williams, who is 11 years old.
They're just kids.
And actually, Abigail is a refugee from those native wars up in Maine, I believe, is where her and her family were originally.
So she has, at the age of 11, is already a war-torn refugee living in a sort of a distant relative's house in a frontier territory.
And not just any house, like we said, this is Reverend Parris's house. Parris, think fire and brimstone.
Oh, his sermons were fear-mongering. It probably only touches on the kind of sermons he... And by the way, when I say sermon, let's also expand on that just a tiny bit. If you're like, oh, I'm going to church, and this is the modern era, you go to church for couple hours on Sunday morning.
Oh, no, it was all day.
All day. You would sit in these pews hour after hour after hour after hour. as he would preach from the pulpit about fear, repent, sin. And this is driven into you. And most people got this once a week. Well, maybe a couple times. But the girls were subject to it daily.
Every day. So imagine living in that household.
They, day in, day out, are listening to him practice these sermons.
It's a cold winter.
Dark.
They're stuck inside quite a bit.
Hungry, tired. And
towards the end of January, they start experiencing these afflictions.
They start to have fits. And when I say fits, don't think seizures. It's not that.
Think more of like The Grudge or The Ring.
The Exorcist.
Ooh.
I always like, no head spinning, no ceiling crawling.
Probably no projectile vomiting.
No. But if you've seen these, think when they have to lash these girls to the bed, when they are flailing, screaming,
contorting,
limb flailing,
speaking
scratching
in tongues,
themselves, spitting up blood, like...
This is what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And terrifying to anyone witnessing. If this is part of your belief system, this was real to them.
If I saw an 11-year-old girl doing that even today, if I would be
terrified.
Yeah.
I do get questions as to like, why did they buy into this? Why did adults look at this, especially in a Puritan world where children are kind of cast off to the side? Why did these adults listen and buy in? Well, I think eventually when, the first execution happens, you can't really back out. But this was not new. So there were afflicted children leading up to this. There were several cases over in Europe, and I think at least 1 or 2 down in Boston. So this wasn't unheard of.
No. And also there's this, Reverend Paris, as the voice of God, would have been sort of untouchable by the devil.
Mm-hmm.
However, if the devil wants to go after the reverend, maybe go after his kids. So they were sort of the innocent. So, of course, they're the ones to get attacked. But since they're the ones getting attacked, they are the ones who can see their attackers.
I wonder if it would have happened in someone else's home. I don't think it would have blown up the way it did.
I don't think so at all.
It's weird to think about. Just the little changes that would have changed the trajectory.
I can only imagine what it must have been like for Reverend Paris to see his niece and daughter screaming in pain on the ground in fits, bashing their heads against the walls. And his fear, I know that I will probably never know what that's like.
Mm-mm. So he calls upon a couple doctors. He has his suspicions, and they confirm it. Dr. Griggs declares the girl bewitched.
Under an evil hand. Mm-hmm. And it's this sort of sets it off. So now there's nothing medically wrong with them, so it must be spiritual in nature. Mm-hmm. Well, let's question them. If they're being attacked, they must know who's attacking them.
And we should mention it starts out with the 2 girls, but it expands to include several neighboring children. I think there's eventually about like 12 to 15 or so.
Yeah, and they're all about that age 9 to 19.
Mm-hmm.
About a dozen girls, all suffering these similar afflictions. But also, again, keep in mind, they might be at the center, but there are neighbors who are then accusing their neighbors and family members, or I saw this woman doing, or this man, or he was ascribing to this. So it's not just those young girls making all the accusations.
I don't want to blame it all on them either, because they're definitely not sitting at the front of this courtroom putting people on trial.
Well,
I mean, they're at the front pointing fingers, but they're not the ones that are signing the death warrant necessarily.
No,
figuratively, in ways, yes. And I think some of those girls were definitely purposefully malicious.
Yeah. Oh, that's always a complicated question.
Yeah, we can't get into their heads. But I do think as kids are kids, some just went along with it because they really didn't know what else to do.
So I think that this is a new experience for them. They now have a concept of their own agency, a concept of attention.
Yep.
Everyone, and not just their parents, but from the governor on down,
the people in power
are paying attention to them. And they're 12, 14, 16 years old, girls or boys.
Yep.
I mean, they happen to be girls in this, but teenagers. We all remember what it was like being a teenager. And imagine having like literally your entire world look at you and go, who's hurting you? Help us save God's kingdom. You gonna turn that down?
No. And also think about when you were young and you lied about something.
Oh, yeah.
Or you did something wrong.
And then
it's kind of hard to go back on it.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when they are then saying these sorts of things. But anyway, so these young girls make some accusations.
Yeah, they give 3 names to start. So the 3 individuals targeted first, like we said, they are very much outcasts here in society. We've got Sarah Good, a poor beggar woman. Sarah Osborne. 2 Sarahs, look at that.
Hi, Sarah.
I know. People mention that on tour too a lot. They're like, your name is on these Sarah. A lot on the memorial stones.
I've never.
Oh, yeah.
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 That's weird.
I definitely have a witch's name for sure.
Yeah.
But they weren't witches, remember?
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so it's Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and then Sarah Osborne's ill elderly woman.
She probably hasn't been to church in like over a year. So she's again ripe for being a target.
Yep. And then the final one is Tituba. I'm sure you've all heard that name before.
She's one of the major players in the narrative. She is an enslaved person, owned by Reverend Paris, lives in the Paris household, likely sleeps with the girls. A lot of you might get this sort of idea, and this is from some pop culture narratives, some literature of this like Jamaican voodoo priestess.
Or like a Southern enslaved individual.
No. Try to dispel that narrative. We know a little bit more today. We understand she is very likely from what is now modern day Venezuela, Central America.
Argentina, I believe. Yeah.
There are several tribes in that area that bear a similar name to her. The Tichibatana is one of them. And we believe, many people, and myself included, believe that is probably not even her name, just where she's from. And she was taken, and now she lives up here in the Paris household. She lives with the girls and interacts with them on a daily basis.
These 3 women are arrested. They are dragged. At first they meant to take them to Beetle's Tavern, a tavern over in Salem Village, but the crowd that had amassed in that time between the arrests being announced and those women actually being taken, they couldn't fit in Beetle's Tavern. So they had to move it to Salem Village Meeting House, roughly about 500 people, literally the size of the population of the town, jammed into this thing. And there in front of them stands the 3 accused. The 2 women are brought first, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, deny any affiliation with the devil. Deny.
Tituba denies.
Like anyone would. If you're accused of witchcraft and you're not a witch, of course I'm not a witch.
And then she changes her tone a little bit.
I think she sees that things are not going well. And put yourself in her shoes. She is at the bottom of this social hierarchy. Yeah, she has pretty much nothing to lose other than her life going in that courtroom. 2 women above her in that social ladder have already been kind of disregarded. No one cares if they say they're innocent.
What do I do? How do I save my life?
So she tells a tale.
I'm a witch. She admits to being a witch.
Makes the decision
to change her tone. She's like, oh, you know what? I'm actually a witch.
She tells a very vibrant story.
And it is validating. All of a sudden, all of their worst fears have come to fruition. My God, there's a witch in Salem. We found her. She has met the devil. She has signed her name in the devil's book. I know that I cannot understand how scared they must have been.
Mm-hmm.
She is one of the linchpins
in this story.
Yeah. This picture she paints is radical. Mm-hmm. She's, again, just giving them all the information they want. They keep pressing, and that's another thing they do, is they keep pressing her for information. They keep, tell us more. Oh, you met the devil. And their questions are designed.
They're leading. They're leading questions.
Leading questions. So it's like in today's courtroom, you can't say, were you at this place on Friday night? They would just have to say, tell us what you were doing Friday night. So you weren't led to an answer. And they were like, were you on the field on Friday night? She's like, yeah, I absolutely
When did you meet with the witches? Where did you meet with the witches?
Field. I just told you, yeah.
How long have you been a witch?
Years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she just continues to go down, and then she admits to signing her name in the devil's book.
Not only that, she admits to seeing more than just her mark in there.
So she looked, and they say, well, if you signed your name, did you see anything else?
9 names.
Yeah.
Or marks, depending on how you interpret it. But
here's the thing. She can't read or write. So she doesn't know who they are.
So they are at that moment in time looking at, in their minds, 3 witches, and there are 9 other ones somewhere
in
the area.
In the area. In my opinion, that's it right there. That's the spark.
That's the main straw.
Yeah, that's it.
So say she said, yes, I am a witch. I afflicted these girls. I'm sorry. And it just ended there.
She probably would have been executed.
The 2 women before her probably would have also been found guilty because that's really where it was leaning. And you never know. They may have not even executed them because before 1692, there were many occurrences of people going on trial for witchcraft and not actually seeing death as a result. But
we can repent and these sorts of things. Because
of this story she tells, because it's not just those 3, there are 9 witches in Salem. So what now?
Let's find them.
Witch hunts are on.
And this spreads like wildfire through the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Yeah, they didn't have cell phones back then, but that did not stop them. They didn't even have like a circulating newspaper. Like I wish we could go back and see some type of press.
It's just person to person to person in a matter of...
But think of the most juiciest gossip you could have, like... Goody Proctor's a witch. Did you not hear? I mean, that's something, and you got to remember, these are all very small towns. Everyone knows everyone. If you drop a name, people are going to know it.
It's probably, you know them, you've met them, you went to church with them, it's your second cousin, your third cousin's married to your second, and that's who it is. And so neighbor accusing neighbor, friend, families.
Fingers are pointed at every type of, this always strikes me, every type of familial relationship other than father and son. So like...
I didn't know that.
Yep. Grandparents, grandchildren, mothers, daughters, sisters, spouses. I mean, can you imagine?
Right? like my wife's a witch.
My stupid husband.
You know what? That one I do understand.
The catch-22 on that, though, as soon as someone in your family becomes accused...
Then you could be a witch.
The probability of yourself being accused after that is... considerably higher.
Right, because how do you live in a house with a witch and you're not a witch yourself?
Exactly.
So this is late February, early March, February 29th, March 1st. And then we go March, April, May with nothing but accusations.
No trials.
There's about 50 to 75 people who've been accused of practicing witchcraft, and they're just sitting in jail.
People just start to pile up. And let's not forget to mention that these jails were not meant for this. They weren't. They were meant for short-term stays.
Yeah, like a couple people for a couple days, maybe. Because punishment, we all know. So today, obviously, you get sentenced to jail. 60 days, 60 years, somewhere in between. We know what punishments were back then, and you've probably not thought about it. Because you like getting your selfie picture, your family photo in the stockades. But that's the punishment.
Right.
Whipping, flogging, stockades.
Branding.
Ear cropping, nose clipping. Very horrible punishments.
But they find themselves in a situation where they have these accusations, but they can't put them on trial. So everyone's just being shoved into these jails. And why can't they put them on trial?
Political instability. We don't really have a governor. Okay, technically we have a governor. They don't know that.
But he's on his way.
We have a charter. We didn't have a charter. They don't know that. They kind of know that. So today, imagine not knowing. There's no real modern day comparison. So we'd had our charter revoked. Our new governor had been meeting with the king in England across an ocean. You need a boat to sail that takes several weeks. So we have a new charter. The new governor's on his way. No one really knows this. He's going to get here, they know, in the spring. And
to clarify, the charter is kind of like our mini constitution for the colony.
Has all the rules and regulations.
Right, and which would essentially set up this court.
Yeah. So with no governor, what do? Well, we're just going to put people in jail.
And wait for him to get here?
Yeah. He'll get here in the springtime. So May rolls around, and this is an odd narrative that I play out in my head, right? There is no historical record of this happening. I It's just one of these things you think about late at night while you're going to sleep. William Phipps, new governor, been in England, gets a charter. Cool. Awesome. He's coming back, crossing the Atlantic. He's all excited. He's the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
What's up, guys?
Yeah, woohoo! Right? He's got a governor's office. He's in Boston. He's got money. He lands, and I'm sure there is someone, an aide. He gets summoned to a meeting again. No historical record. I just play this out in my head. Someone's like, "Yo, hey, Governor Phipps, we got a problem. There's like 50, 70 people sitting in jail for the crime of witchcraft."
That's literally never happened.
Never. And he's like, "Sorry, come again?" You're like, "Well, you're the governor now."
And Governor Phipps, let's be honest, he's incredibly inexperienced.
Inept.
Totally inept. Never held a political office.
No. Failed treasure hunter.
Yeah.
Accidental treasure finder. Governor Phipps, we've got a whole episode about him, so we'll talk all about him and his failings, of which there are many.
It kind of dropped the ball here, but
and why that plays out the way it does. But he doesn't actually form a court to deal with these trials until May 27th.
So we have roughly 60 to 70 people sitting in jails that were not meant for long-term stays. Governor shows up with a new charter for the colony. He appoints a court, and it's called the Court of Oyer and Terminer.
That means to hear and determine, and that's important.
Yeah, this is a court that's solely designed to take care of these trials. It exists outside of the traditional judiciary.
Magistrates come to Salem. They set up shop. They start putting people on trial. May 27th is when it is formed. June 2nd is when it is first convened. And our first witch is executed on June 10th. We go 3 months of nothing but accusations and then full steam ahead.
And almost in all cases, when these folks were brought forward, it would be, and there was a jury. Keep note that there was a jury. It wasn't the magistrate. Yeah. I mean, if you were a white male property owner.
And your friends were the judges and.
Yeah, it was a stacked jury, let's say. Yeah. Stacked jury. But in almost all cases, when the evidence was presented, they were found guilty. And we should talk about evidence, because another thing that made this court unique was the acceptance, if not reliance on spectral evidence.
So I mentioned a little bit earlier about how these girls were the ones who could see their attackers, because in the Puritans' belief system, this was spectral in nature. What I mean by that is that these witches aren't coming up to these girls and like hitting them in the face. There's not this physical violence. Mm-hmm. They're sending their specter or their spirit to do crime. And the court can't see. It's not like you have a murder weapon to bring forward or anything. You have these strange marks. Who did that? Who hurt you?
And it's not just the girls either.
Yeah.
Other accusers will say, Goody so-and-so came into my bed last night, or the specter of Goody so-and-so. So it's...
Or I saw the specters of creatures, or I saw a person and then saw a specter of a creature, or this shadow, or this noise in the darkness.
Things that you can't prove.
Yeah. And that's what their reliance on this spectral evidence was. And this gets down to witches' marks and familiars, and we're going to talk about all that stuff.
We'll dive so much further into the details later on.
What we need to sort of push home is that it is reliant on this concept of spectral evidence. So June 10th, and then trials, executions, trials, executions, trials, executions, and that's it. They run for about 5 months. We're going to get into everything that happens in those 5 months, don't get us wrong, but it does end, and it ends very quickly. So many people are like, how did it all end? Does it end? It's got a lot to do with Governor Phipps. We'll talk about that. Mm-hmm. But basically, on October 29th, he just ends the Court of Oyer and Terminer. He says it must fall. Their reliance on spectral evidence they've sort of realized has failed, and we're done.
So within that time, 20 lives are lost, not including the folks in jail, and roughly over 100 families suffer the consequences.
And I would say almost everyone in the community is touched in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, yeah.
Whether you are accused, an accuser, you lose a family member, whatever the case may be. And we're going to get back into some of the things we've already covered, but this is a surface narrative again. But 5 months, May 27th to October 29th. That's fast.
It's very fast.
And we're still talking about it 330 years later. That's remarkable in the context of history.
Mm-hmm.
An event that is so burns so bright, so fast. So that's our overview, brief. I know we came up with a lot of names, a lot of time frames, a lot of scenarios. We're going to get to the bottom of pretty much any question you might have right now.
Yeah, especially big characters too, like Governor Phipps. We're going to end up
Why did this happen? Oh, what about
details.
this person? What about Andover? Don't worry. Don't worry. We will stick with us. We'll get through all of that.
What about burning? Let's take care of that one now.
So all of these people in Salem, you mentioned 19 were executed. 19 were hanged. There are no burnings.
None.
No one in the Americas was burned. That is almost exclusively a European thing.
It's also not hung.
People are hanged. Pictures are hung. The reason for that, most of you are like, well, witches were burned. Witches, yeah. Witches were burned in Europe. The Pope releases an edict, and this is several centuries prior, making witchcraft a crime against the church, which makes you a heretic, and heretics are burned. King Henry VIII, however, because obviously he doesn't like the Pope, he's like, no, witchcraft is a crime against me. It's a crime against God, and I am God's. It's a crime against the crown. Capital crime, capital punishment is that you are to be hanged. So a lot of people ask where.
Believe it or not, the history on this is a bit foggy, and we really didn't know for sure up until somewhat recently. Yeah, so for centuries, and if you look on all the old maps of Salem, like 17th, 18th century maps, you'll see a Gallows Hill.
Off to the bottom west of the map.
And everyone knows Gallows Hill. Like, I feel like it's well recognized.
I mean, there's a huge water tower there now. It's
with a big witch on it.
Yep, it's a common term in the city. And you know what? Hey, if I saw a place called Gallows Hill,
that's where I'd think it went down, right? So this is where we thought it was for centuries. But in 1921, we've got this historian, Sidney Purley, who identified a somewhat smaller hill adjacent to that larger hill, Gallows Hill, called Proctor's Ledge. In 1936, the city of Salem purchases that land and decides to call it Witch Memorial Land. But then it kind of just sits there.
They didn't do anything?
They didn't do anything.
Okay.
We get this whole idea revisited in 2010. Some local historians start kind of digging into primary source documentation. They're able to confirm based on neighbors being able to see that procession, be able to see the executions, that it was sense. Indeed Proctor's Ledge.
So they're looking at the primary sources of people who are like, I saw this from my window.
Exactly.
And they're like, there's no way it's at the top of the hill.
Exactly. It took us quite a long time to get here, but it is widely regarded as the actual location of those executions. So it was confirmed in 2016. A memorial was built and was dedicated in 2017.
July 19th.
For the 325th anniversary.
And that's located sort of in a weird location. It's behind a Walgreens.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you come to Salem, you may have noticed a lot of places are missing. A lot of homes have been torn down. A lot of locations are lost to history. And unfortunately, this is just the case.
The burden of history. But we do have that memorial there. There's no parking. I think you can just sort of pull over the side and get out and take
Put
a
your
moment.
hazards on.
Yeah. And that's at 7 Pope Street.
Definitely tucked off to the side. Yeah. You have to be looking for it.
Yeah. So if you put that in your GPS, you'll get there. You can walk, actually. I mean, it's about a mile outside of town. But
it's not the prettiest walk.
If you go down Essex Street,
okay,
come down all the way at the end.
Yeah, no, that'll do.
And so then you just take a quick right and sort of a quick left or a slightly less quick left, and you'll get there.
Right.
Yeah, if it's a nice day. But that's not the only memorial.
Right. And I don't think that's the one most people think of.
If you've been to Salem and you've been to the memorial, you're like, wait a minute, that's not what they were talking about. We have one right in the heart of downtown.
And you'll probably visit that on one of your tours if you take one in town. I visit it. You do as well.
My tour on the trials ends.
I like to refer to it as the battleground for the tours. If you linger through that area in October in the evenings, oh my gosh, it is. people are throwing down the gauntlet. But that one also is a beautiful memorial, a little bit larger than the one that we were just talking about, dedicated in 1992 for the 300th anniversary. And a cool little fun fact, E.02 was the individual who dedicated it.
He's a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah, I remember reading Night in school, so that was a cool connection to make.
His experience then and how he taught a fantastic speech, by the way. You can usually find it online. Sobering, if nothing else. Take a read over that. And hey, when you come here, walk around the memorial, leave a flower, leave a memento, take a moment and reflect on the tragedy. However, we all know that Salem wasn't where all of this started.
Right.
It started in Danvers.
So we do have a memorial over there as well.
Yes. So if you're interested, you got rent a car, drive over there.
And actually, while you're over there, you can check out a few other locations tied to the trials. That is
the Rebecca Nurse Homestead and the Paris Parsonage, the piece of land where Reverend Paris's house once stood.
Unfortunately, it's the bare bones of the foundation left. But in the case of the Rebecca Nurse Homestead, I believe you can still go in and actually visit the space.
There are grave markers there as well, likely where she lies and
George Jacobs.
Yes. But that's in Danvers. So if you are sticking to Salem, there are a few other locations that you can check out that have ties to the trials. Let's see. Of course, you have the Witch House, which we'll be talking about.
We also have 10 Federal Street, the site of the old witch jail.
Spelled with that big capital G. Mm-hmm. Let's see. The restaurant as today is called Rockefeller's, also known as the Daniel Lowen Company building.
That was the location of the first church.
Mm-hmm. And then if you're feeling
risky,
well, don't do this.
Don't do this.
The courthouse itself would have stood in the center of Washington Street, sort of between the Masonic Temple and Opus, sort of right there. There's a plaque there that says adjacent to this area. So it would have been in the middle of the road.
So the trials, like the actual trials where it all goes down, right there.
Courthouse is long since gone. But if it's October on a Saturday,
there's a good chance those streets will be closed.
And you can go and stand right there and take a moment.
I can honestly say, as tour guides, we both did this throughout the year. We reveled in the opportunity to bring our folks right to the middle of Washington Street and say, this is it. Like, this is the closest we can get you to where it all happened.
Because normally I'll sort of stand near the town hall. You do the same thing, and I'll sort of point. I'll be like, over there, sort of right there, where the white truck is.
Right.
And in October, when they close the road, you can take people and you can literally say, right here on this very spot. One other thing that we get asked a lot is sort of, well, how do you deal with this, walking this line, right? Because obviously Salem is wildly commercialized, but then we have this tragic history.
So I actually get this question quite often, and it's really a complicated issue. Salem's identity as a city, especially as a tourist city, is extremely complex, and obviously, the Salem Witch Trials are a stain on our history, on Salem's history, on the country's, and it was an incredibly dark time to be sure. And yet, if you visit today, we may look more like a Halloween party. Take the memorial, for example, we just talked about. If you come during October, if you look off to the left, you're going to see Salem Witch Village with smoke machines and hot dogs and a guy on a megaphone advertising tour tickets.
Apple cider donuts.
Yeah, they're so good, but like, it's obviously it's a very different vibe than if you came any other time of the year.
Yeah, and there's people who are on both sides of that fence.
Exactly. I get some folks that are angry, downright upset with the amount of kitsch they see. But then on the other hand, I had a guy ask where our Harry Potter bar was. Like, why don't we have one?
We don't.
You may see people in robes
at bars
in October, but we don't have any use for that.
I think the main reason for that is what they don't see is that craze is only in October.
Right.
So the other 11 months, it's not like that.
And sometimes you'll get visitors that come in full costume, but it's few and far between. Yeah. You're always going to have opportunists seeking to make money off of pretty much anything, even a tragedy such as the trials. Mm-hmm. And I think given our jobs, one could argue that we are, in some regards, profiting off of this story. But I think what it comes down to is making a conscious effort as tour guides, as educators, to tell the full story. Even if it's dark, even if it's complicated, if anything, that should make it even more pertinent to tell.
Absolutely.
And I think as visitors, people also need to make a conscious effort while they're here to learn what really happened and why it's so significant. These were people. They had families, children, homes, livelihoods. And the actions taken by those who condemn them, it doesn't really take much to see the parallels to other instances of persecution throughout history.
I've gotten that question a few times, like, oh, how do you think this relates to some things in modern context or other historical contexts? And you're like, well, if you're drawing that parallel,
it's too easy.
Yeah.
It's too easy. So let's take this horrible story and learn from it.
It all comes down to learning the real history, to knowing that there was no one burned here in Salem, to know that there were no witches here in Salem. And you can go to your witch store and you can get your crystals and get your readings. And if you walk away with both of those things, that's going to help us understand the real history of Salem. That's just about all we got for you on our little background on the trials.
And remember, just a brief overview.
We've got a lot more coming. So hopefully piqued your interest. Hopefully you've got a lot of questions, and hopefully we'll answer them in the coming months in our episodes as we do some deep dives into the trials.
In the next episode, we're going to be giving our first interview.
Ooh.
There weren't any witches back in 1692, but we definitely have a lot of magic in the city today. Anton James, the official magician of Salem. We're going to be sitting down and talking with him in the next episode.
Till then, subscribe, leave a review, and go tell 3 of your friends.
And be sure to follow us on all these socials. We are at Salem the Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.
If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Hello at Salem the Podcast.
And of course, if you are visiting town, please feel free to take a tour with either Jeffrey or myself. Links to both of those are in the show notes.
Thanks for listening.
See you later.